Welcome to the Business Results Program. This is how to transform yourself, your team, and your company to perform better and achieve higher results. Let's get started. I'm so happy you're here. My name is Pete Winarski, and I'm the CEO of Win Enterprises, LLC. Check out CompleteBusinessTransformation.com and look at the latest posts and resources we put there to serve you. I started this program because I want you to know that it doesn't have to be that hard. Business leaders like you struggle to get results, to build your team, to satisfy customers, to grow your businesses, and to stay sane in the middle of these crazy dynamics going on around you. My team and I have had full careers in business leadership roles, and we get it. We've had the same challenges as you, and we can share what we've learned, and we can make your life easier. In this program, I will be joined by various members of our team and other guests that I know can help you. We will offer new perspectives and share some of the secrets that you're just not hearing about anywhere else. The Business Results Program is your personal journey to improve yourself as you improve your company and achieve your most important goals and deliver the business results that make you and your team happy. Now, let's get to today's episode. Hey, Pete Winarski here with Business Results Radio, and I hope you are ready for a really fun interview with Christine Irizarry-Amoruso. Christine is an accountant and a bookkeeper and an expert in discovering fraud. Well, if that doesn't scare you, right? So what's amazing in this interview, I learned so much about people's behaviors, about the way that individuals who join your company might be messing with your stuff and finding ways to essentially steal from you and from your clients. And man, it sends a tingle up and down my arms, because that's the spidey sense saying, man, we better look out for this stuff. Don't worry. Christine shows us what to do. She tells you how to make sure you are safe, what some of the best practices are, how to spot the warning signs. It's all there. It's all in the interview. It's all very powerful and useful and interesting. My goodness, wait till you hear some of the stories that she tells and describes. What were people doing and thinking? Man, they're brazen, trying to do some of the things that Christine describes. So enjoy this, take notes. It's an important topic, and I do hope that you never, ever encounter fraud in your company. But just in case, Christine's here to let you know how to handle it. Hey everyone, Pete Winarski here, and this is Business Results Radio. And today I am with Christine Irizarry-Amoruso. Christine is with a company called Tradition Accounting, and she is a certified fraud examiner. That means that this is an interesting conversation. One, if you want to protect yourself and your company against fraud, but two, if you are a fraud person committing fraud, now you're going to know what you're up against, because Christine can uncover all of these amazing things that people try to pull. And we're in for quite a ride. This will be fun today. So Christine, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm immensely grateful for you to have me join this show, because bookkeeper fraud is at the forefront of one of the most prolific small business frauds that we are facing today.
And it's something we don't even think about, right? How crazy. You want to just trust that everything's working and happening the way it should. And then here you are to whisper in our ear the cautionary tales that bookkeepers may be in there doing things that they should not be doing. And next thing you know, you have a situation on your hands.
For sure. And I would say definitely out of COVID, one of the things, that I was grateful for, that came out of this was small business owners were then forced to look inside their organizations. And, when they were working from home, they no longer needed their workforce. So they had to look at their financials. They had to look at their bank statements. And that's when the questions started to pop up saying, hey, this doesn't look okay. Do you know what this charge is? And, out of this now all of a sudden creates questions and skepticism. And you start looking at your bookkeeper and saying, oh my gosh, could this potentially be fraud? Or is this just something I don't know about that's happening behind the scenes?
Right. Yeah. And that's more than an extra trip to Starbucks, I'm guessing, right?
Usually.
So tell me, what is a certified fraud examiner?
So certified fraud examiners are forensic accountants that take a test or take 4 tests, and hopefully you pass them all and become certified to investigate any gamut of fraud. It could be anything from money laundering to embezzlement to divorce, partnership disagreements, and you're just looking for impropriety in your accounting functions or even deficiencies in controls. It doesn't necessarily have to be fraud, or someone had stolen from you. It could just be a lack, a deficiency in your processes, and you want to tighten up those controls in order to inevitably avoid becoming a victim of fraud.
Yeah, so it's the range from big ugly words that you hear about in the movies, right? Embezzlement, et cetera, all the way down to helping you to recognize your processes are sloppy and it's time to fix them and tighten them up and just get some things in place. So it sounds like it's not necessarily all doom and gloom, scary criminal activity. It could just be we're a mess and we have to get ourselves, get our processes, our house in order so that we can then tighten things up, have more confidence, know where the money's going.
Right.
Good.
And definitely fraud professionals, as of lately, they've been teaming up with a lot of IT professionals because it's just the face of, how we live and the fact that we are now a remote cyber cloud environment. That just opens up the doors to all kinds of new fraud associated with controls or lack of controls. So just as of recent, I had an IT professional tell me what they did was they planted a thumb drive on the floor outside of a corporate building because they were contracted by this company and said, we want to test our employees and say, they all know they're not supposed to open phishing or spam emails or emails that don't look familiar to them. So we're going to take it a step further and we're going to see if someone picks up this thumb drive and puts it in their computer at work. And sure enough, it exactly happened. One of the employees saw it on the floor. They thought maybe another employee dropped it on their way out. They brought it into the company. They put it into their work computer. They uploaded it. And there they now have this, fake spam and corrupted the entire network, type thing. So, it's super important to make sure that you're teaming up with not only accountants, CPAs, tax preparers, but you're also aligning yourself with other business partners that are going to deal with fraud in another scope.
That's so interesting. The flash drive example, it's almost like you're finding a lump of food on the sidewalk and you decide, I'm going to taste this to figure out what it is, right? How many people actually go through a course or a cautionary tale that they even know not to put a USB drive from external sources.
That's exactly right.
And they're just thinking, this could be anybody's. As a good citizen, a good, community here, let me see if I can identify who dropped this, which one of my employees and my friends dropped this.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So that's a great cautionary tale. So what are some of the typical types of fraud that someone might run into?
Yep. So like I had mentioned, I specialize in bookkeeper fraud and working with small business owners because the typical small business has like 1 to 5 employees. The owner is very good at what they do, their trade, and they're out in the field. So they place this high amount of trust in their bookkeeper or their staff accountant that's in the office, right? And so what happens is sometimes the accountant or bookkeeper holds the keys to the kingdom And eventually they leave the owner out of major decision-making details. So the owner's so far removed by time I'm brought in that they can't even answer some of the most basic questions. So just to take it back real high level, I just wanted to mention, I always ask my owners, have you ever heard of the 10-10-80 rule? And a lot of them say no. And I say, okay, well, the 10% of employees will never steal from you because they're great, they have good moral character, and they're just a great person. 10% of employees will always steal from you because that's just their nature. They just feel entitled. They're going to do it regardless if they're good or bad. They're just going to steal. And then 80% of your employees are going to steal if they know that they could get away with it. You know, and that's a scary statistic, knowing that if you're giving this person the keys to the kingdom, you have a 90% chance of being defrauded. And as of the 2018 report to the nations by the ACFE, the median loss for small businesses was $164,000. Most small businesses can't recover from a loss that's significant. They've also determined that 42% of small business owners are going to be defrauded at some point in their span of the business life cycle. That's a scary statistic because as a small business owner, you're employing people, you're paying suppliers, you're keeping the other people employed, you're keeping food on other people's tables, you're paying other people's mortgages. So you have this huge responsibility to make sure that the company keeps going. So even many small business owners, they don't have to have anti-fraud training to even teach themselves some of the most basic anti-fraud measures, right? So you can just maintain a level of skepticism. You can look at your employees' behaviors. You know, these are small things that you can readily notice and start to question. And one of the things that I like to say is most employers, they want to see the best in their employees, especially if they're a part of the furniture, right? And that's because they've been with you for a really long time. And so you don't want to think that they're going to do you wrong. But when it all comes down to it, if the potential is there, they're going to get away with it. So for today's broadcast, some of the most basic frauds that I see that happen are accounts payable fraud and using fake suppliers. So this is a very common scheme. And what they'll do is they'll do fake vendor invoices, or they'll create a company that's really similar in a name to a vendor that you're already using. So for instance, I had investigated a fraud and it was, you know, Joe's Moving LLC. So the bookkeeper went and she created a business name, Joe's Moving Company LLC.
Oh, okay.
So then what she was doing was she was then making one invoice to the actual vendor and then creating another invoice to her company. And this, you know, this business owner didn't think anything of it. All he saw was Joe's Moving. So he thought, you know, everything looked great. Okay, I'm not going to really, you know, notice anything that's happening here. So AP fraud is definitely a common scheme. Another common scheme is definitely ghost employees. So, you know, you run payroll.
It sounds so funny for you to say that, right? Ghost
employees, yeah. But they're the people that you just create out of thin air. You know, they have no identity. They're not a real person. You just input some random 9-digit social security number and all of a sudden here they are. Or they'll make it a family member, right? So they'll just get the family member's information and enter them on payroll. So the business owner, unless they're actually looking at the payroll journals and approving it before the payroll goes through, you're not going to notice like a $500 check. You're not going to notice, you know, like $130 a week, because these are like fly under the radar types frauds. But again, like you're not really going to notice it unless you're reviewing the payroll journals. Inventory fraud. That's a huge one also if you're dealing with inventory, because it's so easy where products just grow legs and walk away. So QuickBooks, you know, the typical small business accounting software, they do have a platform for you to track your inventory, but unless you're doing physical inventory counts, you're not going to notice. A couple years ago, I wanted to learn about inventory fraud. So I had hooked up with another CFE and said, hey, do you have any that you can recommend that I go and, peek about? And they said, yeah, sure. So long story short, it was a scrap metal salvage yard. And what they were taking the copper. So, it was normally going to be discarded, or a portion of it was going to be sold. So as long as the owner was getting the salvage income in, they didn't really think anything of it. But then all of a sudden, when I started looking at the books, I said, well, your salvage income was whatever, $20,000 a month. Now you're at $5,000 a month, but the business has stayed the same. Like, why wouldn't you question that?
It's so interesting that you just called out that example, because there was a company I worked for way early in my career, and that actually happened. It was a manufacturing company, and that exact scenario, some flavor, I don't know what the numbers were, but that type of a scenario had happened, and it was in the auditing of the books that uncovered it, and that launched into the forensic accounting, as you just described, to uncover that someone had actually set up this scheme over a period of time. Before that had happened, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, someone would actually do that, right? And here you are, like, you're talking about setting up a fake person and sending payroll checks to someone who doesn't exist, or a duplicate invoice to your company or whatever. It's a little bit eye-opening, saying people do this, right? Can we go back to your stats for a second? So the
scary. Those are scary.
So that says that the bell-shaped curve, you've got your total loonies who you shouldn't have hired, but you did, and they're going to steal from you no matter what. And then your saints will be saints no matter what, but 80% in the middle, if given the opportunity. So that, think of, if you don't mind telling me some of what you can about the background of that. Is that the equivalent of, hey, I'm going to just slip a box of pens in my computer bag and steal some pens? Or are you talking about, I'm going to steal, with some real thoughtful intent and come up with a scheme?
Yeah, it's definitely a scheme related. And most times it's either the AP fraud, the payroll fraud, or the expense reimbursement fraud. So those are where you're definitely going to find the bookkeepers in that 80% category stealing from you. And it's only because they can do it in small nominal amounts over a long period of time, usually before it gets caught. So on average, it's probably 5 years before they get caught.
Really? So tell us more about the expense reimbursement fraud scheme, because that's one where everyone out there that travels as part of their job, or has some sort of where they've got to take their personal credit card to go buy whatever office supplies, or a restaurant trip or something, that ends up on an expense reimbursement process. So highlight that for us, if you don't mind.
Some companies actually have an expense reimbursement policy. Some do not, because they just take it at face value that you trust this person. And I'm going to say it over and over and over. Trust will steal you blind every single time. And so some companies I've seen under $50, they don't usually require a receipt. Some companies will say, I need a receipt for every single thing that you purchased. Or some companies will say, we'll just give you a stipend, your daily whatever, $25 a day. We don't really care. We know you're out on business. Just spend it, right? So this just happened to me 2 weeks ago. So one of my clients is a GC, and I was getting all these expense reimbursements from the project manager. And I was like, gosh, why is he like asking for thousands of dollars every single month? There's no way that he's going to be, needs all these tools or supplies or whatever, when all you have to do is call the office. I call the supplier, you go pick it up. Like, why are you? So long story short, I like to, I guess this is the New Yorker in me. I like to go out and be nosy. So I go to the job site and he's not there. I go back to the job site. He's out on lunch. I go back to the job site. It's always something. He was never around. So then I said, well, where does he live? So I go and I find out where he lives, and he's actually having construction work done on his house. So I made the ultimatum and I said, hey, I cannot reimburse you these expenses unless you give me proof of these receipts. And he's like, very defensive. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is my favorite. This is my training coming into progress here. Like the first line, when someone gets asked something and they get very defensive, my fraud radar goes up and says, oh, you must be doing something that you don't want to tell me about. So tell me more. Mm-hmm. So I got the receipts and I said, look, I can't pay you. I got the receipts. They were manipulated. They were inflated. They were personal expenses. They were unethical. I'm not going to go into it, but there were some unethical charges in there. You know, and I basically said, look, you know, I'm going to let you off this time because you're very good at what you do, but don't let this happen again. You know, and he understood after a while. People always get defensive because when you catch them in something, you know, it's embarrassing. So, you know, he understood after a while, but he was, I don't work for you. I don't have to answer to you. I don't need to tell you anything. My contract is not with you. Da-da-da. Okay, that's fine. You know, that's fine. But I'm just telling you, this is what's going to have to happen. And, you know, it was nice that I had the owner's back and he understood. And he's like, you know, thank you very much. And, you know, whatever it was. But this is something that a lot of bookkeepers do also. They'll take their personal expenses. They'll, you know, just slip them into the company. And they're very slick about it too. They'll look for expenses that align with what the company's already paying for. Mm-hmm. Your gas, your tolls, you know, certain renovations on your house. So another bookkeeper was renovating her deck on the back of her house. So what she does is she goes and she buys supplies from the same supplier that the owner buys his job materials from. So if you're getting in an invoice and you're seeing, oh, you know, 2x4s, 4x8s, plywood, whatever, he doesn't think anything of it. He just thinks it's going for a job that he's in progress working on. So you know, fraudsters are very slick. And there's a lot of thought that goes into those expense reimbursements.
This is fascinating. This is really fascinating. You know, so people do this. I mean, that's, you know, number one, like it or not, people do this. You know, someone on your team might be doing this, or some third party relationship that you have might be doing this. So yeah, wow, that's number one. What are some of the telltale signs? What would be something that would signal something's not right here? You need to dig deeper.
Yeah. So first and foremost would be if the level of your business has stayed the same, has remained constant, but now all of a sudden you have no money, you see your cash account start to dwindle, you have creditors calling you, you now all of a sudden getting IRS notices, potentially for unpaid taxes. Mm-hmm. You have to sit back and say to yourself, well, if everything else has remained constant, what is happening here? Where's the leak? That's where I usually come in and say, we need to find the leak. So I take out every single piece of paper, I lock down the system, I put in, you know, admin rights, no one can make any changes. And I start at a period of time. Mm-hmm. And I say, okay, this was the last good number, right? And this is working simultaneously with the owner. When was your last good quarter that you know the numbers are great, so I could use this as a baseline? And then I can start finding anomalies between now and then, right? So that's number one for the business owner is what happened? If everything else remains constant, what else has happened? But some of the other signs that I would say are, you know, going back to how I opened, just looking at different behaviors of your employees. And I think it's super important that employers run background checks on their employees regularly, because it doesn't make sense to me to run a background check when you're going to hire someone, they come on, and then that's it. Everyone's life can change overnight. So if, let's say, for instance, someone was arrested for DUI, you didn't know they had a drinking problem or, you know, whatever, but they're driving your company trucks for you, you're now assuming this liability. of having someone on the road with a bad driving record or, a conviction. So you don't want that. Or someone now has a credit card settlement, a judgment against them because they weren't paying their bills. This will come up in a background check or a credit report check. And you don't want this to be an opportunity. You don't want to provide an opportunity for the employee to steal from you, because now all of a sudden they have this, this pressure of, I have to pay off this judgment or this lien or whatever before they start garnishing your check. So now you're giving them the opportunity to steal from you in order to satisfy this judgment. So I think running regular background checks is vitally important to any business owner, not just once.
And what's interesting is I'm remembering an example of someone who, let me get the basics of it because I don't remember the exact details, but they were applying for a job, and in the background check, they discovered, and I think this might have just been a Google search. Like, I'm not even talking about running through a proper background check. In a Google search, they found that they were, had a gambling debt and had defrauded the previous company.
Yeah.
And, it's like, whoa, so that company dodged a bullet because they could have accidentally not known that and then hired that person in.
Yeah.
And then that person might have had a responsibility that gave them access to something like you're describing. And next thing you know, they're funding their gambling habits, right? So, wow. Right?
Yeah, it's true. And, it's hard for business owners when they do find this out, when I do present my reports to them, it's hard for them to console or reconcile with themselves. I now have to sue this person. There's a couple things that come along with that, right? A lot, I would say 80%, 80 to 85% of employees do not sue. They just give them a letter, they sign the letter, they say, we won't pursue anything, just go away quietly, And what happens with that is they go off to the next company and they do it.
They do it again.
So if you don't sue this person and you don't get a judgment against this person, there's a little bit of due diligence that the next employer doesn't get because there's no record of this ever happening to them. So they're now going to be, potentially open to being defrauded themselves. But I also understand why they don't sue, because there had to be a reason that this person defrauded you. Some personal situation, sometimes there's mental health issues associated with it. There's something that drives them to do this, but they've also been with you for a long time. So you treat them like family, they feel like family, but also, what are you going to get back from it? You're going to now spend thousands upon thousands of dollars litigating this case to get nothing out of it. So that's why a lot of employers are like, let's just close it out. What's the number? Let's just close it out and move on.
At what point is it a criminal exercise where, the police come and slap cuffs on somebody?
Never. It's a civil. Unless you're dealing with, I would say, government property or sensitive classified information, but it's always a civil matter.
So it's really up to you. You sue or you don't.
Yep. That's basically it.
Wow. Interesting.
But some of the other signs, that are really telltale of potential flags, they don't get along with other staff. They blame a predecessor for messy books. They get angry when you ask for, reports or question something. They're very defensive. They always suggest getting rid of your outside CPA. I could do it. I can handle it myself. Just get rid of it. If you find signs of drinking or drug abuse, if they all of a sudden start wearing high-end clothes or driving high-end cars, I love that, right? So I go into a company and the first thing I do is I look at the lay of the land. And when you're looking at a certain industry, you already have these benchmarks and say, okay, well, someone in this role should be getting paid this, someone in this role should be getting paid that. Everyone's, cars look the same. And then there's just that one that stands out and you're like, if that's not the owner, someone has some explaining to do, you know?
Who's got the Lamborghini, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. Someone's got some explaining to do. If you're noticing bank deposits are smaller than usual, that's very important. You know, and when I go in and let's say it's look at my internal processes type engagement, I'll say, okay, fine. Who gets the bank statements? And a lot of the times business owners, they go to the mailbox, they pick up the mail, they just drop it down on the bookkeeper's desk. That's not serving anybody anything, because what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take those bank statements, open them up and look at them, review them, and then give them off, right? Because that you're not going to be able to find anything.
Yeah, you won't be able to identify if anything is out of the ordinary if you are not ordinarily even bothered to look.
And I would say if you're showing that you're readily looking or you're in tune to the operations of the business, you could defer some fraud from actually happening, because nobody's going to do anything if they know someone's watching. It's pretty brazen to do it in front of someone.
Well, and this is where you also make your auditing rather visual, so that people know that you're looking, as opposed to, you're in there on a Saturday looking through some things and nobody sees you do it. You don't tell anyone you're doing it. It's back to that 80% that you described. They think, therefore, they could get away with it. But I think what you're describing is the opposite situation, whereas you're visibly checking in, you're asking questions, innocent questions, but ones that demonstrate, hey, I'm interested, I'm curious, this doesn't seem right. It raises everyone's awareness that there's no way I'm even going to bother trying something.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be a simple review of the general ledger. Hey, give me your general ledger. You don't want to give me access to any of the receipts. Give me your general ledger. Let me just take a look. And if you're looking at like monthly expenses for a full year, that should only be 12, right? If you're seeing 14 or 16, maybe it was one from the previous year, or maybe you prepaid something for the next year and, at the end of this year, okay, I get that. But now all of a sudden, if I'm seeing like I said, 16 or 18 transactions, but there should only be one bill a month, one car payment a month, one cable bill a month. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing 2 or 3, I'm going to be like, hey, so can you now, follow up with all these additional questions? And that's usually where it opens up this, okay, she knows what's going on. Do I, let it out right now? Or do I just see what she comes out with? Like, obviously I'm trained in body language and, reading social cues. And when I start to see the change in attitude, or the sweat, or the flush in the face, or all of a sudden they have to go for lunch. Oh my gosh, I just had like 4 weeks ago, I went in and I confronted the fraudster. Like, this was the day we were confronting the fraudster. She literally took her stuff and left in the company car. So I said, hey, Mr. Owner, she just left in the company car. We need to get her back here. And he's like, she did what? He called OnStar and reported the car stolen, and OnStar shut the car off, and she was stranded in the middle of the street. I mean, it's just like, all you have to do is say, yes, I did it. No, I didn't do it. And we'll figure it out from there, but some people, they just like, either they're relieved that they finally got caught, or they just don't know what to do. They're like, lost it.
This is a riot. Christine, what is the craziest story that you've ever encountered, either you with one of your clients, or just out there in the world of what people have tried to get away with?
I mean, that's a good one. That's a good one. The when you tell them that they're fired and they just keep coming back to work situation. I mean, I could just go on for days and days. They're just endless. Just when I think, because, Donald Cressy in 1973 came out with something called the fraud triangle. And basically it's 3 legs of the triangle where you figure out their opportunity, where they have the the motive, the opportunity to commit the fraud. And then you say, okay, well, what's their pressure that would make them commit this fraud? And then what's their rationalization to committing the fraud? So I try and use that triangle in every fraud investigation I do, but it goes right outside the window sometimes with some of these really crazy ones, because you're like, gosh, you didn't even fit the triangle at all. Like, there was nothing in here that would have led me to believe you being the suspect. So there are some really crazy stories.
Wow. So I think you shared a lot of what a business owner could do. Just let's sort of wrap it up, if you will, on what are some specific things a business owner can do to protect themselves. And it's okay to repeat some of the items you've mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's always a deficiency and lack of controls, because when you're working in a small office, sometimes it's hard to create that lack of control. It could just be you, maybe as someone who answers the phone, and the bookkeeper. So, where could you create the control in that process? For that, it's either the owner becomes more involved in the day-to-day of the business, and like I said, open the mail, look at it, review it, pick up the phone every once in a while. This goes really quick. I answered the phone and said, how could I help you? The customer was on the line getting very upset. They never got the credit card refund. They kept calling. Okay, hold on. I look into it. And I say, oh, I see the refund here. Did it go to last 4 digits of this credit card number? It's not my credit card. So, okay, give me a couple minutes. I'll call you back. So I look, and all of a sudden I see all the credit card refunds went to the same credit card. Mm-hmm. So right then and there is where I said, oh my gosh, the bookkeeper's been processing credit card refunds to her personal credit card. And that could have been simply avoided by the owner being more present in the day-to-day operations. So you can't necessarily create the control, but maybe you can create a control and say, whenever someone calls for a refund, I'll take care of it. I'll handle it. Just give me all of the information. I'll process the refund and I'll give you the confirmation when it comes back, right? Or you can have someone like me come in and create that internal control. I can come in 1 day a week and I can review your financials. I can reconcile your bank statements and look for anomalies. The background checks, super important. We already discussed that. Understanding your books. Just because your bills are getting paid, your payroll is getting paid, and you have some cash in the bank does not mean that you are doing good and no fraud is happening. That's a common misnomer that many small business owners seem to rely on. Sign and verify all your checks, especially your payroll. Don't allow anyone to process payroll unless you've looked at the time, you've reviewed GPS logs, if you have trucks on the street, any new employees, any new hires. Sometimes you can pick up the phone and call your payroll provider if you outsource the payroll to one of the large payroll companies and go around the person in your company who's processing the payroll and say, can you send me the payroll reports for last week, last month? Because if they're manipulating reports, they could do it in PDF or some other software and give you a manipulated report. That's why you want to pick up the phone sometimes and call the provider directly. The business owner or another employee should reconcile credit card statements, because you're not going to find fraud if you're not actively looking for it. You want to make a policy that requires employees to take vacation. There was a woman, she hadn't taken vacation in 12 years. I made her take vacation. I went into her office and I looked under her computer and she was keeping 2 sets of books. So,
oh my.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that, they take vacation, super important. You want to monitor your accounts receivable balances, because you can find, signs of like check kiting or lapping, where they take another customer's payment and apply it to another customer's account because they're stealing money and routing it into their own personal account. So those are signs of kiting and lapping. You want to create access points and internal controls. You don't want to give everyone admin access. I know it's really hard because business owners are on site, they're doing a job, they're, whatever it is. You have to be available and you have to be present. And take away the rubber stamp. I hate companies who rubber stamp. I do not want to see that ever.
I'm going to have to go find my rubber stamp and hide it.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been tremendous. And, I'm going to make sure my CFO and bookkeeper listen to this podcast episode, because it's just so rich with things that I wouldn't think of, so here I am, the founder and CEO. And yes, I have a team of people, and we have an extended group of third-party contractors that work with us and do work with us and for our clients on a daily basis. So we have a huge team, huge roster of people. And as you just pointed out, they're probably all really good people. However, there could also be, the occasional thing to pay really close attention to. So,
and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've just barely scratched the surface, because think about it, under accounts payable, there could be 10, 15, 20 different types of accounts payable schemes just on accounts payable. Think about retail. You have managers and cashiers and the cash involved with retail, and the schemes associated with refunds or credits or stolen merchandise. I mean, it's just, so we just barely scratched the surface. And this is what I try and tell my business owners is, look, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to educate you. Small business is what grows the economy. So it's super important for me to make sure that this lasts and this survives, because I'd rather see the money in your pocket than in someone who's stealing from you's pocket.
Absolutely. I'm with that. Well, Christine, thank you for your time today. This is really enlightening. It's really important. It is a little bit scary, but this is why people like you exist, so that we don't have to think about, the frightening things. You can enlighten us. I don't want anyone out there now, being paranoid and looking underneath the, looking in the closet, see if the hamburger jumps out with the little mask on, right? But the reality is, these sorts of things do happen. It's unfortunate. And wouldn't you want to know right up front, right away, rather than be disappointed and learn 5 years later?
For sure. I agree.
So thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. This is Business Results Radio, and this episode in particular is going to help especially the small businesses who don't have a lot of the resources, and those medium and larger businesses. These things are still happening for you too. So keep an eye open. Thanks for listening to this episode of Business Results Radio.